This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is April 23rd, 2026.
I'm Scott Lundbaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. And in theory, we will get this episode up on April 24th, and I won't forget for 2 days again, like last week. But like last week, we are talking about David E.B. flip-flopping on what he's doing with DRIPA once again. And federally, Carney is taking his majority and using it to take over Parliament, as is his right, according to liberal stands on Reddit. Support the show at patreon.com/politicos. Before we get deep into the show, we do want to send our thoughts to Joan Phillip, MLA, who is, quote, very ill, according to the Premier, and hasn't just had a rough few weeks politically, but health-wise has not been doing well for a few months, and we hope she recovers.
Indeed. She's in our thoughts.
So let's start with the big fun that started the week off. Rumors dropped on Sunday evening, I believe, and Monday we got a press conference from David Eby where he released a statement with the First Nations Leadership Council saying his commitment to amend DRIPA, and it absolutely had to happen this session, and it's a confidence matter, is now off the table, and it will happen, something may happen in the fall following a summer of consultations and working with Indigenous partners to figure out what to do.
Yeah, so just to go over the timeline a little more, because I don't think it was quite as... your explanation didn't quite capture how ridiculous it was. So during the day on Sunday, rumors started flying, posts made on social media from various reporters that, hey, the Premier is going to be making an announcement on Monday, and what they've told us is that there is going to finally be the legislation that is in, version whatever now, and it'll be introduced, won't be a confidence motion, but it's coming Monday. And then a couple hours later, that all changed. So we had two different versions just on Sunday of what happened before the final Monday announcement of, yeah, we're kicking the can down the road on this and going to do more consultations that may or may not result in anything.
And honestly, I'm fine with this position if it had just been his first position. The thing that has totally undermined all of David Eby's credibility is the past 5 to 6 months of whatever he was doing. He also noted in the press conference that it was Attorney General Nikki Sharma tapping him on the shoulder to say, like, why are we doing this? We don't have the support within caucus. Like, we could just not do this. And that's what clued him in, and not the being yelled at for multiple hours in several meetings by Indigenous leaders. It's a bizarre turn. One that, the Greens welcomed and many Indigenous leaders obviously welcome, but it's just a bizarre shift after everything else.
Yeah, not the least of which was he's spent months now saying that this needs to happen, it's important, that there was going to be some change was non-negotiable, and that all faded away over the course of this weekend. And yeah, he basically spent months shredding credibility, talking up the urgency for a while, doing nothing while doing that, and then in the last several weeks, changing his mind several times, which not only undercut his original positions, but made you wonder how serious that urgency actually was. So, Gordon, all in all, It's been a giant mess, and EB has burned a massive amount of his credibility and political capital to do nothing. I mean, we're basically at the same point we were in December, right after the Gazella case came out. And in the meantime, all that's happened is EB has vacillated back and forth on this and did not actually deliver any change on this whatsoever.
I won't say there's been no change, because the thing he's definitely done is breathed a lot of air into the right-wing critiques and anger at DRIPA, misguided as it probably is, because you could get rid of that and the Gazella decision still stands because it was largely based on a failure of consultation, which arises from Section 35 of the Charter, and that's not going anywhere. And so...
I mean, the interpretation that bit was a pretty solid bit of that, too.
Sure, but we have this little bit of claim from EB that government is in chaos because there's at least 20 lawsuits being amended to account for that. And full credit to Gordon Hoekstra of the Vancouver Sun, who decided to dig into this. He and Postmedia asked the government, hey, what are these 20 cases? And the government said, no, sorry, it's the names of cases is solicitor-client privilege, which is bullshit. So they went a step further, though, with the Vancouver Sun, and they searched court records of every one of the 200 different First Nations names in BC courts online and tried to find if any had been amended since December. And the answer is no, none have. That doesn't mean that EB was lying, because cases could have different weird names for lots of different reasons, like it's a development company or something. But the credibility gets thinner when they're not willing to tell us what the actual issue is and prove that it's an issue.
Yeah, so the article does go through several cases where the Gazella decision is cited in it, but these all appear to be cases that were filed after the fact and not amendments, which feels like a real, weird mistake for someone who is a lawyer and former attorney general to, blend the two of those together in a way that is procedurally and factually just incorrect.
Yeah, I think they identify about 3 cases that have been launched since, in 2026, involved in by different nations challenging BC Hydro or different mining projects, etc. But it's very different, as you say, than we have this wave of amended litigation. You have to remember, a government body like the government of BC is being sued all the time by everyone for everything. So,
and maybe at one point, he got a briefing note, maybe that said, opposing counsels indicated they're going to look at amending it or are considering amending it, or our own analysis shows that these 20 cases are the ones that are most likely to be amended as a result of this ruling, and just kind of ran with that. That's the best steel man I can give on this one for that, but it's pretty sloppy for
the BC
anyone,
Assembly of First.
Lawyer.
The BC Assembly of First Nations does say that they're aware of cases that have been amended, or that there are amended cases that they're generally aware of, but they can't name them because they were given them confidentially, and so they're just kind of aware that some of these exist. But it's straining credulity, and so we clearly can take the summer to think about this and do it a little bit more coherently, I think, rather than dropping bizarre demands that change by the day to his own caucus, that is.
Yeah, that said, if there is a case that does come out before this comes back around in the fall, there's a real chance that this is just going to end up being even more embarrassing and politically damaging for EB during that time. So, yeah, he buys himself some time and kicks this down the road, but it's not, closing the book on this at all. And there's still kind of the broader tensions that have been here, not just with respect to the litigation, but also what polls are showing is a pretty sharp decline in support by British Columbians of the government's approach to reconciliation and DRIPA specifically, and all that just means the big political problem has not gone away, and yeah, people pay a lot less attention over the summer, and they definitely get time for the government to kind of figure out next moves, do consultations, and try and come back with something in the fall, but this is still a big political problem for the government that's not going to go away.
The other challenge is all of this flip-flopping has really damaged the government's credibility with First Nations, who now don't trust him.
Or the First government. Nations, the broader public.
But I'm talking about just the negotiations he's talking about doing over the next few months. He can't do those if they don't trust him.
Not as easily, that's for sure.
Not as easily. And yeah, more broadly within his own caucus, within the broader public, and so forth. The calls for Eby to resign are growing in a way that they hadn't before. People weren't necessarily like, oh yeah, he's doing great, but it wasn't like he needs to go. And that's starting to shift in a way that might be hard to stem.
Yeah, it's particularly brutally bad mishandling of this all is probably the thing that's ultimately going to spell the end of his premiership. Because, man, this is a hell of a bit of damage to take without a path to recovery out of it, and particularly with this issue still also being unresolved. It's, not like he got a resolution on this that will buy peace for a while. So yeah, it's going to be the case where it would very much not shock me if the next election, the NDP is not led by David Eby on this, and on the off chance they are, it's probably not going to result in an NDP win.
The other thing we mentioned last week was the government bringing forward 2 treaty bills, which already faced opposition from the Wewaquam and Laxqualam nations. Those 2 nations, as well as the 9 allied tribes, have put together a joint press release to say kind of what they had initially said last week, but more forcefully of, hey, you need to pause these bills, consult fully with us, or things will get uncomfortable. They don't say it directly in their press release, but it came out, they basically are talking about like more blockades and protests if these treaty bills go ahead. Which, it's another awkward tension for the government.
Yeah, and particularly on this one where just because there's so much overlap in the claim area, moving ahead with one treaty almost certainly means you're angering a different nation on it, and it really makes this whole thing like a huge tangled mess to resolve. And yeah, this is what we talked last week about, how this was 30 years in the making, and even then, if you couldn't get a clear answer on whose territory this is actually going to cover in a way that's, maybe doesn't make everyone happy, but at least, maybe makes everyone equally unhappy about where the boundaries are drawn on it. And it's just, I think, really highlights just how tricky this issue area is. And there's a lot of talk about how BC doesn't have the same treaties that the rest of the country does, because 150 years ago, province didn't bother with that, and that leaves a lot of this stuff still unresolved. But it kind of highlights that this is more of a multi-generational undertaking on this, rather than a thing that can be wrapped up in the term of a government, even a decade or two. Because these are the first 2 that have come out of the process. This is not anywhere near the end of the road for the broader province on this. So it's easy when something comes up to in the context of DRIPA or any of the other reconciliation stuff to say, oh, we need a treaty we need the treaties process to go through, but this shows just how that's hardly an answer to the in the short to medium term, even if it's where we need to get in the long term.
Yeah, there have been other treaties that have been successful in the modern era. The Tsawwassen First Nation Final Agreement was signed in 2009. There's a Yale First Nation Agreement from 2011. The Malnuth First Nation Final Agreement also in 2011. Tlalomin in 2016. That's still kind of going ahead. And a few others. So there are a lot ongoing. It's, as you mentioned, obviously a very complicated process. It's not just that BC doesn't have the same treaties others, but it's also that it's such a diverse province in terms of First Nations. It's 200 different nations, as opposed to many provinces have only a handful making territorial claims. It just makes it all much more complex as it is. Like, the ideal world is a lot of these nations can work together to have co-governance agreements over lands, but I totally get why that won't always work because of competing interests and priorities. But the government doesn't seem to believe that the land claims by these nations are as strong as those in the treaties. This will probably get litigated for however many years, and on it goes. Something that also causes litigation is dams, and BC Hydro is looking at building more. Yeah,
we now have Site E being considered. Site D, I guess, got skipped over in this one, but in terms of this particular story, the Energy Minister, Adrian Ditz, announced this week that we really need to just kind of take a good look at everything. Nothing's off the table because our energy projections are we're going to need a hell of a lot more electricity than we thought we did a decade or two ago. And as a result, they're looking at a bunch of different options for how to provide BC Hydro with the generating capacity that it needs, specifically Site E, which it was identified in kind of the initial study of the Peace River, which identified the various sites. This one would be right near the border with Alberta, as well as they're looking at a previous proposal for the Butte Inlet area, where they would have a set 17 run-of-the-river hydroelectric sloughs that would generate more than a gigawatt of energy, which is crazy for a bunch of run-of-river projects.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how this progress rolls out. We obviously know the history of Site C, which took a monumental effort to get through to the point that Horgan couldn't kill it, or couldn't justify killing it. The big dams are always going to be tough because they take a lot of work, time, and impact a lot of area, some of which goes back to those First Nations territories. I don't know the site who will make claims with the Site's E area. Run-of-the-river stuff is probably a little more manageable to get through, and what's nice about that is even though on scale it's a lot, you can do lots of little ones to get there and get up. It still has impacts on waterways. Anytime you do that kind of thing, it will, but it's interesting, right? It's a interesting time when we have such high demands for electricity and growing that, there's a lot of opportunity here for us to generate a lot more electricity. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get that east-west power grid that everyone likes to talk about and promise, but not actually build.
Yeah, the thing, though, if we do have a better east-west power grid, because there are interconnections between BC and Alberta, and I would don't actually know this for a fact, but I would presume there's some degree of connection between the Alberta and Saskatchewan grid, is that for a lot of these, you would probably expect the electricity to be flowing eastward out of BC because we're the ones with all the hydroelectric potential. And you in the prairies, other than parts of northern Manitoba, you're pretty limited on that. And, you could balance some of it out with solar and wind on the prairies, which are better suited for it, but it would probably be the case where a fair bit of like the baseload power ends up going eastward out of it.
All the better for us.
Yeah, I mean it's money in the province's pockets, but it doesn't necessarily solve the how do you provide electricity to what at some point in the future will be 6 million, 7 million people. I mean, we're not all that far off from it. I think the last estimate I saw was 5.7. That wasn't all that long ago we crossed 5 million in the province. Like, it's a pretty grown province. It's going to need a lot more electricity just on population growth, plus all the industrial and resource projects, plus significant electrification of various, modes of transportation, industries, etc. You're just going to need like a gargantuan amount of power to deal with all that.
Yeah, the Globe and Mail notes that several natural gas and LNG terminal projects, as well as data center and AI-related loads, leave us facing an undersupply challenge that we didn't have on the books the last time this was all updated. It's really great to build dams to help us do LNG exports. Feels like we're really shooting our toe to... I don't have a good analogy here, but there's something.
No, I mean, those are also like pretty significant revenue generators for the province, too. Plus, a bunch of the various mining projects up north get a lot of benefit as well from the greater electrical capacity up there. To say nothing of the move to change every vehicle over to EVs.
Only 75% of them now, Scott. Only 75%.
75% still a lot of cars.
Yeah. Speaking of cars, the government is under fire today from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who got an FOI about how much deputy ministers are allowed to spend on vehicle leases. And the answer is $1,200 a month.
Which is crazy.
Which is a lot, yes.
Yeah.
Undeniably.
Yeah, they note in their press release, and for the record, isn't just the opposition parties picked up on this and are hitting the government pretty hard, but they note that various Mercedes Benzes go for like $574 a month, or Range Rover $8 something. So it's not just the case that we're giving deputy ministers and associate ministers a vehicle allowance. And you can argue whether or not that's a reasonable perk, but that's at least within the range of reasonableness to give that as a general thing. Doing $1,200 a month, and they note the average bill that is $1,103 for that is more the case of not just providing a vehicle benefit, but like very clearly in like the luxury vehicle range. Mm-hmm. And this is where the political danger for the government lays, because it's pretty hard to tell BC that you need to tighten your belt. We're going to be making some changes to extend what PST covers, so we're going to tax you a little more, as well as we're tightening our spending in a bunch of ways while giving this benefit. And it's small overall, but it just, it's the $17 orange juice, because people don't really know if something should cost $1 billion or 800 million, but everyone has a sense of what their vehicle costs them, and this is the sort of thing that's real easy to make understandable and can absolutely hurt the government on this, and it's the government's response of, we want to be competitive and help people, be convinced to join our government doesn't necessarily land super well in this case, particularly when, as Rob Shaw notes, some of these deputy positions are paid well over $300K a year. It's already pretty competitive. If
that's not as much as the Surrey superintendent, though, who I think is now getting $500,000 a year.
I'm not even particularly upset about that level of pay for deputy attorney general, but it's a hard case to make on this one.
So, fun fact, my new car is a 2026 Ioniq 9, a full-size SUV EV. I was just looking up if I had gone for the top trim, which we didn't because it's a $85,000 vehicle and we wanted to save a little bit of money on that. But the top trim leases at $1,250 a month. And so it's not impossible to find cars for $1,200 a month. And they definitely found, for their press release, the cheapest Mercedes they could to try to nevertheless, I'm not saying this is an absurd take. It's $370,000 a year. It's a policy that's been in place for, it predates this government. Is it worth reviewing? I think so. Probably. Is it something that the government should be defeated over? Probably not. It's not just I think the bigger criticism that I could see landing that the CTF doesn't make here because it doesn't fit them is, hey, we don't give this to all employees. Teachers and all these other unions just fought hard for cost of living increases. Where is the perks for them? Kind of thing. And I'm not saying everyone should get a $1,200 vehicle allowance, but if the people at the top are getting that, you should have a little more fairness if you're the NDP, or maybe take away the perk at the top and balance it out a bit. I'm sure in a week or two we will get a little press release about redefining the compensation agreements with deputy ministers, but
I don't know. The finance minister was out defending this one, so
she was in question period. Of course, she's got to defend it. You can't, especially when it's an employment thing. You can't just flip on your staff in the middle of press conf or you risk them striking. I guess I don't know. Of course, she had to defend them. But we'll see. They could flip on this.
You could still say we're going to look at this. You don't have to go swimming like that.
Well, the other thing BC's been looking at apparently is that a new pipeline might come to Vancouver from the oil sands. This is not really announced, but it's something Adrian Dix said or was asked about or kind of teased as a little bit more promising than another North Coast line that they don't support and would oppose. The whole thing is a bit of a bizarre story because there's not actually news here. No one's announced anything. It's just kind of a half a leak that's not really been denied. The funniest thing for me is just having Adrian Dix, the man who in 2013 decided we were against pipelines as the BC NDP and then fought with John Horgan against the pipeline in 2017, come out and say, oh, pipeline to Vancouver sounds much better than the alternatives.
Well, to be fair, it's also against big hydroelectric dams, but as we just talked about, seems kind of keen on them now.
The debasing.
Yeah.
Full debasing.
Part of it is the ground has just shifted a lot in terms of where Canadians are on various large projects, but I think also part of it too is that when you're in opposition, it's easy to look at things in a pretty simple yes, no, do we like pipelines or do we not kind of thing. And when you're in government and get a somewhat broader view of the various interests and trade-offs of that, it's not always going to be the case where you're going to keep that same zeal you went into government with when he first got bumped up from opposition.
Are you saying that's why the BC Conservatives can take such a black and white view of repealing DRIPA as a whole and not having any plan to actually deal with land claims?
I mean, I think they're probably going to win the next election, particularly after the debacle of the last month or two. But yeah, I expect that should they get elected, they're probably going to bring in some significant legislative changes, but somewhere down the road, they're going to end up with like a somewhat more nuanced position on it. And yeah, that's the pattern you see with governments time and time again on various issues. So, just how it is in a lot of ways, and it's just kind of the cycle of politics in Canada.
We don't know what's going to happen with this pipeline. I did see another article where the federal government has said Tim Hodgson, I think it's the energy minister, is open to using the federal government's Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program to support the construction of this pipeline. The government has kind of ruled out paying for another pipeline directly, but this could be a backdoor to let them give some money to help make a project happen, provided there's Indigenous ownership. God, the fight's it's always the same. I'm getting so tired, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about politics, though, is rarely are things ever definitively resolved neatly for all time.
Well, the thing is, they built the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline, and now we're talking about another one. Oh, it's such a mess. Whatever. Fine. What's not fine is our relationship with America, as the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement negotiations are starting up again. So there's a lot of headlines about bluster and ultimatums already getting made by Trump and responses by Carney. But the, kind of interesting thing is that Carney has announced a advisory committee on Canada-US economic relations, which I didn't count this. It's like 20 or 30 people. But there's some interesting names on that list.
Yeah. So this is a council that first got started under Trudeau, and this is kind of the new version of it announced now. But there's a few departures from the old one, but notably on this one, we have a former leader of the opposition and as well as a former Conservative cabinet member. That would be Erin O'Toole and Lisa Raitt, respectively, as well as Jean Charest, former Quebec premier and one-time Conservative Party leadership candidate, as well as rounding this out with a bunch of people from the business community. At least one union leader we spotted on the list.
Lana Payne from Uniform, yeah. Ralph Goodale's on there as well for some liberal representation, and Dominic LeBlanc chairs the committee. But yeah, very interesting to bring a lot of the red Tories kind of into the advisory role of the blue liberal government, I guess.
Yeah, the business conservatives as opposed to the more populist cultural conservatives we've got running the party now.
The populist cultural ones are actually the ones who probably understand Trump better to their minor defense, but that doesn't mean they would be good negotiators.
Yeah, on this, nor do I think they have the same interest in crafting good trade policy and are willing to really look at some of the stuff in detail.
Are you at all optimistic about these trade talks?
I mean, how optimistic can you be with a unreliable counterparty that seems to change their mind and are not necessarily great at holding to prior agreements?
We're going to get some kind of quasi deal, which will then immediately be broken. I just kind of hope Carney doesn't give anything away before we even gets to the table, because he's done that repeatedly already, conceded on multiple files or interests and not gotten anything. Like, we don't have a digital services tax because Trump didn't want it, and that didn't seem to change the nature of the relationship. We went ahead with a bunch of immigration and border reforms that they demanded to accomplish I don't know what. And yeah, so Trump has demands. I don't even care what they are anymore. They're just laundry list of random grievances of what he saw on Fox News.
It's the usual stuff. Dairy, the various provincial liquor stores not stocking American liquor.
The Online News Act.
Yeah. And like a lot of this stuff is things that would actually be a win-win for Canada to get rid of, because these are generally bad policies that don't actually benefit Canada, but it would be insane to give them away in a trade deal for nothing in return. Like, this is the sort of thing you negotiate and get concessions for in exchange for making concessions on this, even if, the econ and policy professors will tell you that a lot of these are bad policies that are hurting Canada.
Well, haven't you heard Mark Carney is very badly educated in economics, so maybe we will make some mistakes here. At least that's what I keep hearing, despite it being a terrible attack line. Oh, but there is another attack line on Mark Carney, and that he is a very rich man, and that puts him at risk of conflicts as Prime Minister, according to the Ethics Committee, who have come out with recommendations on how Canada can improve its Conflict of Interest and Ethics Act.
Man, this feels like Groundhog Day, because we were talking about this almost exactly a year ago.
Ethics comes up frequently, right? It was a big thing under Trudeau.
Particularly like the blind trust thing. Like this is a new report out of the parliamentary committee, but like it's basically talking about the same stuff we were talking about when Carney first became PM and then in the election that happened last April.
Yeah, and the best part of this report is the Liberals disagree with it. So it is a majority report where the Conservatives and Bloc have said, hey, we need to tighten a bunch of rules, particularly around party leaders, or when people become party leader, cabinet ministers, and the Prime Minister. Prime Minister in particular shouldn't have blind trust, because that's not true divestment in the committee's view, or at least the majority of the committee. The Liberals, for their part, say, hey, this is mean. You're just picking on one guy who happens to be our guy, but you shouldn't do that. Which kind of neglects the fact that like the Prime Minister is not just one person, but the person who should be like, we shouldn't craft laws to target one person, obviously, but if it's one office that is the highest office in the land, I think it's a slightly different situation where I can at least understand or at least sympathize with the majority's position.
Yeah, I think if you're like, this office is more involved in decision making, have more power, so we should keep a closer eye on it. Yeah, that made some sense, but the finance minister as well is a pretty important one to be above reproach. But we're going to craft this not to make general points about how the office should be structured, but specifically to target what we see as the political weaknesses or vulnerabilities of the current holder. That's significantly less good as a way to do policy making. And honestly, you can see this report through either lens, depending on your partisan or economic or professional viewpoint. Sometimes issues aren't really well thought of until they become issues, right? Like, we haven't had a prime minister with a bunch of blind trusts and as much wealth prior to... Trudeau had, a net worth of $5 million or something when he became prime minister, I think. He must have had some arrangement on it. Yeah. Less than Carney has, but, that's not a dollar figure that you wouldn't need to set up some kind of arrangement like this. It's not like you just had an RRSP that He just didn't bother touching while he was PM.
No, but he also didn't come from corporate boardrooms, so no one really had the sense that Trudeau was there for the money.
Yeah, all his other ethics problems were generally of a different nature. But yeah, you do raise a good point that like sometimes this situation pops up, you notice something then, like the whole the French version of the act used a slightly different term for aircraft than the English version, because it just translated to airplane rather than aircraft, and that's why it wasn't a problem for him to ride on a private helicopter by a very wealthy person.
Yeah, and we're all familiar with the existence of rules and laws that make you go, oh, we didn't know we needed that law until. Like, I think it was on the Beaverton podcast, they were talking about one town just passed the law banning public defecation. And, sometimes you think you don't need that law until people are shitting in the streets. And I don't know that that's what inspired them, but maybe that's the case here. We'll link to the report and coverage.
Yeah. Oh,
I haven't. Yeah, go for it.
Just one other thought on that is we have had prime ministers come from corporate Canada before. I mean, Martin and...
Oh, yeah, Paul Martin is the big one.
Well, I was also going to say, Brian Mulroney is the first one that came to mind, actually, on that. So this isn't also like a case where we've never had this particular consideration before, which does, I think, lean me a little bit more on the, they're just looking at Carney on this one and trying to figure out how to target him rather than...
We
what
also
happens
have
when
moved
you get a PM out of corporate Canada?
Yeah, we also have moved a lot in ethics and disclosure law. Like, a lot of this didn't exist in the 80s or existed in minimal forms. And so we're trying to give the appearance of being more ethical and divested so that scandals happen less. But, whether that is true and effective is up to, again, your partisan interpretation. But the Liberals won't have to worry about majority committee reports going against them in the future, as they have as they have amended the standing orders of Parliament to give themselves 3 more seats on every committee. The composition of committees after the election was 4 Liberals, 4 Conservatives, and 1 Bloc member. And now it will be 7 Liberals, 4 Conservatives, and 1 Bloc. For those of you who are great at math, that's more than like 50% plus 1 by a little bit.
Yeah, they're
which they have the slimmest of majorities.
On that they would if you were to do a little more proportional, where they'd actually get still a majority on it.
But hey, Scott, this is the privilege of being a majority government, is getting strong, stable majorities on every committee, so you can just get things done.
And they didn't have to prorogue was the kind of working theory on how they would manage this.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that procedurally. I think it's because they just added, but I'm not entirely sure. And I think that's why we don't have any NDP MPs on any of the new committees, despite them getting a bit of caucus funding.
Well, I don't think they got official party status, which is the thing that actually gets you the seats.
They got pity money.
So yeah, it's not a shock, and if they got a majority government, fair enough. I didn't particularly like the line that, I can't remember which Liberal minister said this, but something about how, might have been McKinnon, who's House Leader, but that this would mean they weren't going to be distracted by the political games at committee, but one party's annoying political games is another party's keeping the government accountable and doing the work of opposition. So it's a really which side of the house are you sitting on, and whether or not that's the way it goes. But I didn't particularly like it on the, we are just going to face less scrutiny on it, because the oppositions do important work, and sometimes you actually really need someone to look at this stuff and ask, are you sure about that? Is there something you're missing or not considering on this one?
Well, we still have the Senate for now, or at least a largely independent Senate for now. And we also have the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who we have just appointed a new one. The vote happened in the House of Commons, a 164 to 153 vote, with the Bloc and Conservatives voting against the Liberals' nomination of Annette Ryan. Nevertheless, it went through. I haven't gone through the exact vote. That must be some NDP and Green votes went with the government, but I don't have that in my reporting. Ryan is an interesting pick because she wasn't the opposition's choice, right? They wanted Jason Jacques, the former interim PBO whose term expired earlier this year. Ryan has said, she wants to continue providing clear implications of spending decisions, but is going to leave the, quote, stark language to parliamentarians, which I think puts her in a less confrontational role compared to some of the past parliamentary budget officers we've seen. I'm forgetting his name, the one prominent guy who was always in the news, particularly against Harper, I think it was.
We've had a few of those. There's definitely one in the Trudeau era that also put out some fairly pointed reports on it. I don't love that change just on that front. A lot of ways we've sanded off a lot of the sharper edges of a lot of the accountability mechanisms. So, keeping the ones that we have as pointed as possible would not be the worst thing.
Kevin Page, that's who it was. He was quite strong. But yeah, I like the PBO. They do good work, and it's always been helpful to see their analysis come out. I'll keep an open mind with Ryan and see how her reports come out, but hopefully we get some good things. One of the great functions of the PBO is costing election platforms. And so we'll get some interesting numbers as the different parties pitch their proposals to the PBO. Not necessarily anytime soon, but eventually. And finally, one of the new bills before the House of Commons is C-28, or the Canadian Space Launch Act, which is going to give Canada its own sovereign way to space. We're the last of the G7 countries to have our own space launch capabilities, according to House Leader Steve McKinnon. Or Transport Minister, sorry, Steve McKinnon. I feel like
they're doing a little sleight of hand on that one with the European Space Agency. I don't think Italy and Germany have standalone capabilities.
And France's is in the Caribbean?
I think France is the one the Europeans use for all their stuff, which is actually South American, if I'm remembering correctly, because Europe's pretty far north to be doing the ideal position for launches.
Scott, I don't know if you've looked at a globe, but so is Canada.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great, and they're planning on doing this. Last one I saw was the southern tip of Nova Scotia, so get as far south as you can, because anything but polar orbit's not great for, but it's actually a little shocking if you look at how far north Europe is. Have you ever seen one of those maps of the North American cities superimposed over Europe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everything's way further north. Edmonton is Central Europe. That's it.
Yeah, but Italy is south of Canada, at least. In any case, cool. I like space stuff. Would love to see us invest in it. Cool. That's all I got to say to this.
Yeah, it's great. It's one of those things where it's going to be a little curious how it's actually going to shake out, and whether or not this is really going to be something that comes to fruition, because we've seen a lot of announcements from stuff, and this isn't even we're throwing a lot of money behind it.
No, Scott, McKinnon says it's going to be at least 2 to 3 years before we see rockets take off from home soil.
It's going to be
so ambitious.
It's going to be 2 to 3 years before an application is made to the government, and several years after that before anything's approved on this. For all the talk of how Canada's now building at speeds not seen in decades, there's been a remarkable act of actual building to go with that. So yeah, I'll believe this one when I see it, because passing a bill to like create a legal framework is a pretty far stretch from actually getting anything built on this, even though it's actually would be something that'd be really nice to have. And we should be trying to work on developing this capability because we don't necessarily want to be reliant on space sets.
No, we do not. Or America these days. So, good luck.
If we're doing
Canadian
sovereignty,
astronauts.
This is a pretty good one to focus on.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.